What is up, everyone, and welcome back to our YouTube
channel.
If you don't know, we're Kara and Caleb.
I'm Kara.
And I'm Caleb, and we are so glad that you are here.
We really are so glad you're here. We're glad you're here. On this channel, we talk about a lot of things. Similar to our podcast, which is called Revolutionary Relationships, we talk about
It's a community.
It's a community.
To support you.
In your...
emotional.
In relational.
And spiritual evolution.
Evolution.
And over the amount of videos that we have created, however many there are, our most popular videos are, or have been, when we talk about purity culture.
Well, garage tour.
Oh yeah, our garage tour. We lived in a garage once.
Purity culture.
And purity culture. And speaking of spiritual evolution, Kara and I both separately, we didn't know each other until 2 years ago, but we were raised in evangelical Christianity. And so much of our spiritual evolution has been deconstructing that evangelical Christianity and really untangling the damaging effects of purity culture, being raised in purity culture.
Yeah, we both have had different streams of that journey, but both have been really impacted by purity culture and the messaging of purity culture. And really what purity culture did, it kind of infiltrated the church in the 90s and infiltrated culture in so many different ways. And there's a lot of messaging that happened that now we're starting to recognize has done a lot of damage and was very, very destructive for people. So we've done a video about this before, but we wanted to break down today basically your perspective, like a man's perspective, and then we're going to do a separate video.
Of how it played out in my life.
How it played out, how it affected you, kind of the effects that you've had to unravel and walk through and untangle. And
there's so many different directions that I could go through into or take with this video. But the first thing that really comes to mind and something that I've had to work so much on is essentially inside of purity culture. Obviously, the big message is, sex is only for marriage, right? And to save yourself for marriage. And there was never any conversation inside of the church. And because we were so connected to the church, there was also, therefore, never any conversation inside of our homes about sex, right?
Or sexuality.
Or sexuality.
Yeah.
That's a big one, right? Never any conversations about sex or sexuality. The only thing that happened was we were told that sex, there is no conversation about it. It was just made for a husband and wife in the confines of a marriage. And then also, and maybe if you're watching this and you can relate to this, maybe this was your experience as well, but I can't even tell you how many times, we're watching a show on ABC, and this is back in the 90s, early 2000s, and a woman might come on with cleavage or showing or like being in a dress that's a little revealing or something, and honestly, or watching a movie, and we would have to cover our eyes.
Or fast forward the VCR.
And you could cut the tension in the room with a butter knife. It was so thick. And so what happened was, because there was no conversation happening about sexuality or about sex, whenever I started to grow, like any young adolescent boy into an adult male, there are natural things happening in your body, natural sexual things that are happening, sexual desires and sexual thoughts. And because there was never any safe space to actually talk about these things, and because of the way that we had to respond to these things, you start to associate your natural behavior as something that is bad.
You start to internalize it, right?
You start to internalize it as this is something that is bad. Obviously, you internalize something and you suppress something and there's no space to talk about something and you hide all these things. Like, I'm having these natural thoughts and desires about sex and sexuality and sexual desires and so on and so forth. But I just know that those things will lead me to sex, and sex before marriage is a big no-no. Therefore, I suppress and I deny. And then there I start having these internal thoughts of like, oh my God, Caleb, this is so bad. You say this is so bad for so long, it's internalized as you're so bad.
Yeah.
Like, you're bad. And that really is shame. And now you have a grown-ass adult male
who believes he's bad.
And is full of shame. That can play out in a lot of different ways. And one way that it played out heavily in my life was because if I think that I'm bad, Right? If I deep down know that the core fundamental part of me is bad, I don't want anybody to see the real me. Because if you see the real me, you're going to see just how bad I am.
Or you're going to reject you.
Or you're going to label me, judge me, or reject me. And so what happens is I spend my entire life hiding behind a facade. I spend my entire life pretending to be somebody that I'm not. I spend my entire life trying to perform, and this is my experience, perform and achieve and hustle and do great things to hide the truth about what I believe about myself. And then the kicker is, if you got too close, if I felt exposed, if I felt like you were about to see just how bad I really am, I used rage, putting my hand through a wall, hitting myself. I used rage to regain control of a situation so that you didn't actually see me. Whenever I felt exposed, I would use my rage to regain control of that situation so that you didn't actually see me. And I said this in another video, but when I look back at my life, and I can say this now after years of healing work, I was the epitome of toxic masculinity. But at the core of my toxic masculinity was just a 6-year-old little boy, a little tiny Caleb inside of me that was so afraid of being seen.
Yeah.
Because deep down, that little boy thought he was just so bad.
Yeah. I'm thinking of an example that we just actually watched on Ted Lasso. If you watch Ted Lasso, it's like our favorite show. And there's a scene where Nate does something and he feels so much shame about it. You see him feel the shame around it and you see him internalize it. And then he goes into the dressing room and he actually spits at himself in the mirror.
Oh my gosh, that's so hard.
And it's this really...
That's so real.
It's so real. It's this really beautiful portrayal of what happens when we exist in that I believe I'm bad, or I don't like myself, or I'm bad as I am mentality. I feel like that was such a good visual example of...
Because I know that
shame.
that hits so close to home with so many people. I never spit at myself, but I would hit myself because I hate myself so much. I would physically try to harm myself. And it's just terrible to think about it.
And when you're a little boy, you can't distinguish between the messages of your body is bad and you're bad. Like, you don't have the ability to separate those things. So of course that would become internalized towards the self of like, oh, I'm bad, my body's dangerous, I'm dangerous, something's wrong with me.
And I want to just draw this connection. I'm just looking to see how far we are into this video. This is, again, has played out, and I'm feeling this right now. I haven't talked about this in a long time, so maybe somebody listening to this can relate to you. But I know that one of the tentacles of purity culture and the shame that I harbored, or the shame that I carried, it manifested as something called retroactive OCD jealousy. And it's a big word.
Term.
It's called retroactive OCD jealousy. And essentially what that means is there is an obsessive compulsion to know the sexual history of your partner's past. Say that again. There is a obsessive compulsion to know the sexual history of your partner's past. And I found myself there time and time and time again. And as I have been able to heal from it, because you can heal from it, and I think the first step is recognizing that it is a thing. It's an actual condition. It doesn't mean that you're just, because it's so easy. You hate yourself for wanting to know. You hate yourself for wanting to know, but the need to know in the moment outweighs that hate.
It's probably intertwined with anxious attachment too.
100%.
When we think about those two things, there's probably like a...
But that shame, right? Like, because of the shame, I needed to control everything. And I was trying to make sure that I wasn't about to get hurt, or I wasn't about to be vulnerable, or I wasn't about to be exposed when I find out the history of the girl that I might be dating at that time. So let me know now. I need to know now. And so there would be this, and it's really the epitome of toxic when you realize that I actually created that moment. I need to know so that it would start a big fight, so that then we can resolve that fight, and then I could feel close to that person. Right? That's the epitome of toxic relationship, because I didn't know how to actually have intimacy and healthy relationship. I only knew this idea of intimacy through chaos. And that's something that I've had to really work and heal throughout my journey. And I just wanted to draw that connection because if you do identify with retroactive OCD jealousy, one, you're not broken, right? Two, you can heal from it. And three, from my experience, it's been directly connected to the shame that I've carried and that was internalized as a young man, as a young boy.
So now that we know what happened, how did you
hire a therapist?
True,
hire a really good therapist.
But how did you start to unravel?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a longer question, but if you could give some practical tips of like how do we begin?
I think if what we're talking about here is shame in a lot of ways, right? What we're actually talking about is shame, and Brene Brown does such a beautiful job at explaining this. But essentially, she says if you put shame in a petri dish, it needs three things to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. Right? Secrecy, silence, and judgment. I think those are the three things. And she says that shame cannot survive being talked about. Right? Shame cannot survive being talked about. And so a big part of the healing journey is actually finding somebody that you feel emotionally safe with, so that you can have hard conversations, vulnerable conversations, and talk about the things that are creating the secrecy and or keeping you secret, living in secrecy and living silent and with all this self-judgment as actually amplifying the shame in your life. But when you bring it out to the open, right, it loosens its grip on you. And I think back about, I talk about that anxious judgment or the retroactive OCD jealousy. And I had that one time with you.
Yeah.
Early on in the relationship, I had that one time with you. But shortly after that, and that's literally, there have been times where I've had that thought, but I've been able to regulate in the moment and dismiss it and let it go.
Yeah.
Right? But after that, we had that conversation where we were laying in bed and we were talking about sex. And you could feel me getting squirmy. Yeah. And everything in me wanted to shut down, wanted to walk away, right? Because there was still a part of me that I had not yet brought to the surface to be fully seen. Still part of me that there was so much shame wrapped around. And this conversation was bringing it to the surface. And I felt so much shame. I was getting really kind of fidgety and I wanted to shut down and walk away. And in that moment, Kara asked if I was feeling shame. Right?
Bring it to the light.
And if there is one thing that I feel like really, since meeting Kara, if there's one thing that I have felt emotionally safe with her from the beginning. I've been in partnerships where I do not feel emotionally safe. This is a big indicator on the success of this relationship. Can you work towards emotional safety? Absolutely. But I started from a place of emotional safety with Kara, which has just made this experience the easiest and most magical experience, revolutionary experience in my life. And because I felt so safe, I was able to engage in that conversation. And the first time really bring to surface some of the things that I was still hiding and suppressing in my life. And I think that there is a correlation between that surfacing, speaking about it, releasing it, right? And then also being set free or let going of that toxic behavior that just created so much havoc in my life that was directly attached to the shame. The last thing that I want to say is, and I know that you'll talk about this on your video, but I want, because it is my experience as well. When you spend all of your life thinking that you're bad, thinking that your body is bad, thinking that you're bad, the ramifications of that is that you don't live a life where you trust yourself.
You're stealing my words. But
I know you're going to talk about it, but this is true. When you think that you're bad,
you're going to distrust everything about you.
You don't live a life that's connected to you, or a life where you trust yourself. And the hard part is if you don't trust yourself, you're constantly trying to trust things outside of you, which is the epitome of a codependent relationship, right? Not just in partnerships, but to life, where you can't actually trust yourself that you're making the right decision. Trust yourself that what you're feeling is leading you where you want to be. Trust yourself that your life is being held. Trust yourself that you have what it takes. Trust yourself. And you can't get where you want to go without trusting yourself. And so much of this healing journey and the beauty that happens is that when you learn how to build resilience around the shame and begin to change this narrative that you're bad. Right? The byproduct of that, the fruit of that, is you begin to trust yourself. And when you trust yourself, you take back your life.
Absolutely.
Well,
more on that in the next video.
Yeah, more on that in the next video. Thanks so much for listening. If you are a man or a woman or anyone that's listening to this and you identify with it, please let us know in the comment section. If you have other questions around purity culture, let us know in the comment section, and we will do our best to make a video. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back.